The scrawny 54-year-old man struggled to get out of bed. His joints creaked and moaned like old wooden doors, but everything was as usual. Shaking the sleep off his head, the man donned his clothes for work and mindlessly inserted his arms into their respective sleeves. He got up in the morning like everyone, ate breakfast like everyone, and made his way to work like everyone. But he was no ordinary man. He was Puyi, the last living link to China's 2,000-year-old ancient history. The conditions he lived under in 1960, working as a gardener at the Beijing Botanical Gardens, were light years away from the lifestyle he was accustomed to when he was young. After all, he was born as the last emperor of China. It was February 7th, 1906. Jiro Puyi opened his eyes to the world for the very first time, unknowingly entering a life of unimaginable privilege. He was born to Prince Chun, a member of the Jiro clan, which belonged to the ethnic Manchu ruling elite of the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty was established in 1644 and had been ruling over China for centuries. Puyi was born into this imperial family as a member of the royal lineage, making him the most privileged boy on the planet at the time. However, things were about to change. During that time, the stability of the Chinese empire was standing on the shaky shoulders of one empress, Dowager Cixi, a woman with an agenda. Once a low-ranking concubine to the Xianfeng emperor, Cixi ascended to the top by bearing the emperor's only son. Upon the emperor's passing, she retained influence within the empire through her son Tongji, ascending to the throne. However, Tongzhi was still a boy, so decisions were made for him by an appointed council. Conflicts arose, and Cixi orchestrated a coup, positioning herself as the leading figure within the council and installing two loyalists. This strategic move effectively secured her significant control over China's affairs, as long as the emperor remained a minor. When Tongzhi reached maturity, his life ended abruptly under mysterious circumstances. Seizing the opportunity, Cixi placed another child on the throne, her nephew Guangxu, allowing him to mature under her watchful guidance. However, Guangxu was no mere puppet as he tried to reform imperial China, prompting Cixi to imprison him. This was the current state of affairs when Puyi was born, with his uncle Guangxu imprisoned. Little did he know that the changing world around him would soon trap him in a whirlpool of political intrigue and power struggles. On November 14, 1908, Emperor Guangxu died of arsenic poisoning in prison, most likely from Cixi's orders. She then named Puyi as her successor and died the very next day. Puyi officially ascended to the throne on December 2, 1908. In an expected twist of irony, the 2-year-old toddler made his discontent known by throwing a tantrum and crying profusely throughout the ceremony. The young son of heaven was still unaware of his significant role in the world. Thereafter, he was adopted by the Dowager Empress Longyu. Any chance for Puyi to have a normal childhood, a normal life even, had now vanished. The young emperor spent his days in the Forbidden City, the Chinese imperial palace where an army of eunuchs would attend to his every childish whim. Puyi was under such intense observation every time he had to defecate, the head eunuch would examine his bedpan. Despite the obvious challenges of living under such watchful eyes, there were perks to being a living deity. Puyi eventually discovered that his commands were obeyed without question, and he exploited this power by ordering his servants to beat the eunuchs whenever they did something that displeased him. Nonetheless, there was one person who dared to challenge the young emperor, his wet nurse and surrogate mother, Wenchao Wang. She tried to instill discipline into the young boy, talking him out of doing horrible things to the eunuchs. Unbeknownst to Puyi, who was now drunk in power, the world was continually changing, and he was walking on crumbling ground. China was rapidly changing and on the brink of revolution. Prince Chun was desperate to save the failing reign, so he enlisted the help of retired General Yuan Shikai, who then negotiated with the rebels. Yuan persuaded the royal court that resisting the rebels would lead to disastrous consequences. He managed to convince them to bring an end to the Qing dynasty, presenting the alternative as a stark choice between accepting a massive bribe or being beheaded when the rebels inevitably seized control of Beijing. There was nothing like it. The swiftness at which Imperial China came to an end. On February 12, 1912, the Dowager Empress Longyu signed the Imperial Edict of the Abdication of the Emperor, bringing an official end to Puyi's brief reign. It is reported that she received a substantial pension of 1,700 pounds of silver from General Yuan Shikai in exchange for her cooperation, alongside the assurance of her personal safety. Nevertheless, she didn't have much choice in the matter anyway. However, the rebels allowed Puyi to stay in the Forbidden City, keep his servants, and live like an emperor for the rest of his life. Puyi did not know anything about the changes happening outside his palace walls. After orchestrating the abdication, Yuan Shikai proclaimed himself the president of the Republic of China, holding power until December 1915. Seeking to create a new dynasty, he declared himself the Hongxian Emperor in 1916. However, a significant decline in his health disrupted his plans for imperial ascension, resulting in his death just 3 months later. The unrest in the country continued, and in July 1917, a warlord named Zheng Shun restored Puyi to the throne. However, he only remained there for 11 days before a rival warlord named Duan Qirui ended the restoration, forcing Puyi to abdicate the throne once again. While Puyi indulged in his unchecked power within the Forbidden City, the Republic of China's president anticipated the monarchy's restoration and aimed to prepare the young emperor with modern knowledge. Sir Reginald Johnston, a British scholar, arrived in the Forbidden City to educate Puyi, introducing him to English and other subjects. Initially intimidated by Johnston, Puyi gradually warmed up to his tutor. With Johnston's influence, Puyi began to break away from traditional customs, embracing modern conveniences, a new hairstyle, and even eyeglasses. Johnston also helped Puyi moderate his extravagant lifestyle and foster self-reliance. This exposure to Western culture ignited in Puyi a desire to study at Johnston's alma mater, Oxford University. As Johnston's influence over Puyi grew, the palace eunuchs sought his intervention to temper Puyi's tyrannical outbursts. While Puyi was just discovering new things in his isolated life, trouble was brewing outside. In 1924, the 18-year-old former emperor was finally expelled from the Forbidden City during the Beijing coup. Suddenly removed from the only world he had known, Puyi was now a refugee without a nation. Puyi and his court relocated to the Japanese concession in Tianjin, where he lived in a state of virtual house arrest under the watchful eyes of the Japanese. Puyi's life in Tianjin was starkly different from his life in the Forbidden City. He was no longer an emperor, but a puppet of the Japanese, playing the role the Japanese government wanted him to. Realizing they had an opportunity to advance their interests in China, the Japanese government treated Puyi as a state guest, providing him with an extravagant lifestyle. Meanwhile, they manipulated him into their narrative and reinforced his hopes of regaining his power. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria and established the puppet state of Manchukuo. 3 years later, they installed Puyi as its willing emperor. Unknowingly, Puyi further legitimized the Japanese occupation of Manchuria. Puyi ruled Manchukuo in extravagance, but in reality he held very little power as the government was run by Japanese officials. Despite the illusion of a lavish lifestyle, Puyi lived under constant surveillance, facing constant pressure from the Japanese to adopt Japanese officials, customs, and manners, which further distanced him from his Chinese roots. However, the unrest in the country and Puyi's life continued. In August 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, forcing Puyi to flee to Changchun, Manchukuo's capital. However, Soviet troops quickly overran Manchukuo, capturing Puyi at the airport. This marked the end of his life under the Japanese, and a new chapter in his problematic life began. In 1945, the Second World War came to an end. Puyi was taken by Soviet troops to the Russian Far East, where he was detained for 5 years. During this time, he was subjected to Russian indoctrination, living a lifestyle far removed from the luxurious existence he once enjoyed. However, he still enjoyed special treatment, being exempted from hard labor and having meals alone. Puyi returned to China in 1950 only to face a radically different political climate. The Communists emerged victorious from the Chinese Civil War and founded the People's Republic of China under the leadership of Mao Zedong. Puyi, once the ruler of millions, was now a simple citizen in a newly socialist state. Puyi was handed over to the new communist authorities and held in a detention center in northeast China, ironically close to his former Manchukuo Empire. There, he was subjected to the regime's stringent re-education programs designed to transform former elites into socialist citizens. The Fushun War Criminals Management Center focused on breaking down inmates' beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes, instilling them with communist beliefs. In these camps, Puyi participated in labor, self-criticism sessions, and studies of the new Chinese doctrines. This slowly broke down Puyi's imperial psyche. Furthermore, Puyi was required to acknowledge his crimes against the Chinese people and express remorse for his actions. Puyi's imperial identity and the 2,000 years of ancient history behind it crumbled into dust. Eventually, he was released in 1959 as a reformed criminal. Once the most powerful man in China, Puyi was now expected to earn a living like a regular citizen. He was assigned a job as a gardener at the Beijing Botanical Gardens following his release. While to an outsider this may seem like a depressing fall from grace, Puyi's life finally reached a state of calm. In a way, it was his acceptance of the new reality. After all, he was no longer a puppet to the Japanese or an emperor. Puyi later became an editor of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, a Chinese socio-political movement. Puyi became a target as he was part of the Old China, and therefore had to live in protective custody. This was the last turmoil in Puyi's life, as his health was already declining at that point. In 1967, Puyi passed away from kidney cancer. After living an extraordinary life fraught with power struggles, political unrest, and drastic cultural shifts, Puyi's death marked the end of a 2,000-year-long legacy as the last emperor of China.